Tantor Audio presents A Triumph of Genius, Edwin Land, Polaroid and the Kodak Patent War, by Ronald K. Fierstein. Narrated by Pete Larkin. Prologue. It's always about the light. Any photographer will tell you that. It was a beautiful December late afternoon in the desert town of Santa Fe, New Mexico, a place renowned for its unique light. The rocky landscape, faintly dusted with snow, would have been brightly lit in dramatic burnt orange and rose rays refracted from an afternoon sun sinking in the sky toward sunset. It is that magical light that illuminates the beauty in anything it reaches. It is the photographer's best friend and secret weapon. The little girl was excited as her father snapped away, taking image after image of her with his spiffy high-tech camera. The father watched his daughter with delight and shared her joy. The wonders of light had enthralled him since his youth. They had already brought him great wealth and success. He was all of 34. But the year was 1943. And the high-tech camera was a Rolleiflex box model filled with Kodak roll film. His daughter was disappointed when she learned that it would be weeks before she would be able to see the pictures her father had taken. "Why can't I see these pictures right now? I don't want to wait." In those days, the film would have to be unloaded from the camera, taken to a pharmacy, and shipped off to a laboratory to be developed into negatives. That process would involve a series of baths in various chemicals, all done in the dark at controlled temperatures. Once dry, each negative would then have a precise amount of light projected through it, the image being focused onto photographic paper held at just the right distance so that the image was sharp. That paper, or positive, would next be developed to bring out the image, washed and then processed further to stabilize the print. Finally, after drying, it could be shipped back for the little girl to see, long after the enchantment of the moment had faded away. When confronted with an upset child asking silly questions, seemingly impossible to answer, most fathers would respond with a comforting, if exasperated, "Because," or "That's just the way it is," or even "I don't know." But not this father. As a colleague acknowledged many years later, this man never had an ordinary reaction to anything. Instead of dismissively laughing off his daughter's frustration, he shared it, he embraced it, and on the spot, at that moment, he committed himself intellectually to solving his daughter's dilemma. He would figure out a way to create a photographic system, a revolutionary camera and film combination that would allow images to be viewed immediately after being taken. He would invent one-step photography. Landisms. If you are able to state a problem, then the problem can be solved. Life, October 27, 1972. Every creative act is a sudden cessation of stupidity. Forbes, June 1, 1975. Optimism is a moral duty. Fortune, January 1974. The only thing that keeps us alive is our brilliance. The only thing protecting our brilliance is our patents. Newsweek, May 10, 1976. There's a rule they don't teach you at Harvard Business School. If anything is worth doing, it's worth doing to excess. The New York Times, April 27, 1977. Do not undertake a program unless the goal is manifestly important and its achievement is nearly impossible. Land's Polaroid, Peter C. Wensberg. If you are right, the facts at the moment don't matter, because in due course the facts will catch up with you. Popular Photography, October 1977. A worthwhile invention must be startling, unexpected, and must come into a world that is not prepared for it. The New York Times, May 15, 1983. What the physical sciences teach the social sciences is how to fail without a sense of guilt. Boston Globe, October 18, 1976. Chapter 1. A Very Special Young Man. Life was getting progressively tougher for Avram Solomonovich, his wife Ella, and their 3 sons. They lived near Kiev in what is today Ukraine. During the reign of Tsar Alexander III in the late 19th century, violent anti-Jewish pogroms had led to a full assault by the Russian government against its Jewish people. It was the world of Sholem Aleichem and Fiddler on the Roof. As conditions continued to deteriorate for the Jewish population in the early 1880s, Avram decided to take advantage of a program that helped Russian Jews escape to America. It was called the Jewish Colonization Association and had been organized by a wealthy European banker, Maurice Baron Hirsch. With its help, Avram and his young family sailed from Odessa to freedom. When they arrived in New York City, they were processed at the Castle Garden immigration facility, where Avram's name was anglicized to Abraham Land. The boys were renamed Samuel, Harry, and Louis. After their arrival, the Lands were sent to an agricultural colony in Colchester, Connecticut. It was part of Baron Hirsch's organization. Abraham worked on the farm as they all acclimated to their new country. By the end of the decade, they had moved to New Jersey, where they became naturalized citizens in 1888. Abraham got into the scrap metal business and eventually moved the family back to Connecticut, settling in New Haven. In the years after their arrival in America, Abraham and Ella had 5 more children, 2 sons and 3 daughters. It was a large family, but their father's focus on education led all of the children into successful lives. 2 of the younger boys attended Yale and went on to become lawyers. 2 of the daughters became teachers. The others were successful in business. Harry, Abraham's second oldest, had been born in Russia in 1880. He followed his father into the scrap metal business. Just after the turn of the century, Harry married Mattie Goldfaden, a fellow immigrant from Russia whose family had settled in Cleveland. They settled in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where in 1904 their first child, a daughter they named Helen, was born. 5 years later, on May 7, 1909, Mattie gave birth to their second child, a boy. He was named Edwin Herbert Land. As a child, Helen apparently had a hard time pronouncing her younger brother's name and called him Din, a nickname that would be used by his closest friends and colleagues throughout his life. The family moved to Norwich, Connecticut around 1919, where they settled into a Jewish area. Eddie, as he was known around the neighborhood, joined the Boy Scouts and was bar mitzvahed. Harry's scrap metal business prospered. He developed a valuable client in the Electric Boat, a company that had built submarines for the U.S. Navy. Harry also invested heavily and successfully in real estate, although much of the family fortune would later be lost in the 1937 recession. In the early years of the 20th century, most of the rest of the Land family moved to Brooklyn, New York, where they remained close and observant of their faith, gathering to celebrate Jewish holidays in groups as large as 40 cousins and uncles and aunts. Conspicuously absent from these festivities were Harry and his family. A niece described them as being not unfriendly, but cool and distant. Mattie was very, very aristocratic and very well educated. Whatever the reason, Harry's aloofness seemed eventually to infect Edwin, who by young adulthood had distanced himself from his larger family as well as from his Jewish ancestry. He told relatives that he had given up the Jewish faith for business reasons. "I'm trying to live down even the honorable part of my past," he once told a journalist. In later life, Edwin developed a penchant for privacy and secrecy, and was known to resist any and all attempts to have a biography written about him. As noted by Victor McElhenney, a journalist who covered, worked for, and eventually managed to write a book about him, Land did his best to keep his origins obscure and to cultivate a mystery, leaving few clues to his boyhood. At his father Harry's funeral, a nephew asked Uncle Edwin why he didn't participate more in family gatherings. His answer was, "My work is my life." While some aspects of Edwin's personality may have been enigmatic, The one thing that became unquestionably clear early on was that Edwin Land was blessed with a gifted intellect and an inquisitive mind. When Edwin was about 5, Harry brought home a new gramophone, then the state-of-the-art for phonographs. Edwin was too curious about the device to resist disassembling it. Dressed in Dr. Denton's one-piece pajamas with a flap in the back, he proceeded to lay out all the pieces of the machine on the living room rug. Unfortunately, the young boy did not leave sufficient time for the reassembly, and when Harry came home, the back flap of the pajamas came down and a proper spanking ensued. The episode had a long-standing effect on the budding scientist. From then on, nothing or nobody could stop me from carrying through the execution of an experiment. A promise that clearly led to what would become his famous propensity for non-stop and intense experimental work. Edwin Land's fascination with light started as a young boy when he became interested in stereopticons, kaleidoscopes, and stereoscopes, 3 early 19th century devices that manipulate light. The stereopticon, introduced in 1850 by William and Frederick Langenheim and also known as a magic lantern, was a slide projector with 2 lenses that produced realistic-looking scenes from superimposed images on glass photographic slides. The kaleidoscope, invented in England by Sir David Brewster in 1816, uses multiple mirrors mounted within a tube at various angles to create duplicate images of objects viewed through it. By filling the tube with small colored objects, beautiful patterns of color are created by the light coming through the tube. Land later described the device as the color television of the 1850s, noting that no respectable home would be without a kaleidoscope in the middle of the library. Sir Charles Wheatstone invented the stereoscope, a device that converted 2 side-by-side images into a 3-dimensional composite. In the 1830s, Brewster and others produced many models of stereoscopes in England and France. Beginning in 1862, popular handheld stereoscopes, first designed by Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes and his business partner Joseph Bates, were widely marketed. These were early forms of entertainment in the days before moving pictures were invented. Land later called himself the undisputed king of the stereopaths. Young Edwin's favorite 3-dimensional images were those of caves. The local library in Norwich had a stereoscope for use by the public. Recalling its great popularity, Land described how it transported the child through the interplay of stalagmites and stalactites into the distant depths of the caves, having converted the 2 slightly faded sepia flat dull photographs into a vivid reality in which you could hear the dripping water, smell the dampness, fear the darkness as you sat with your legs crossed under you on the chair in the dear old library. The effect and experience these visual devices could create was a profound discovery for young Land, one that would affect him deeply. Reflecting back years later on the impact of the stereoscope, Land observed, "Our Western race, hopelessly immersed in all the philosophical intricacies from Plato to Wittgenstein, was not ready to notice that this presumed toy was a device in which the child and the 3-dimensional space he rejoiced in seeing comprised one single union of mind and matter, of soul and body, of man and nature, a single union of what in fact had never been divided and did not need reuniting." Inspired by these devices, Land, still a pre-teen, began to read about optical science and discovered the textbook Physical Optics by Robert Wood, a professor of physics at Johns Hopkins University who was well known as an experimenter of great ingenuity in the areas of optics, light, electricity, and photography. Land slept with Wood's book under his pillow and read it nightly in the way that our forefathers read the Bible. It was an intellectual awakening that would shape his life. In Wood's text, Land discovered daring theories and daring adventures and colorful experiments, a feeling for life as seen through science that captivated me from then through the rest of my years. The next phenomenon of light to catch Land's eye occurred when he was 13. His curiosity was stirred at a summer camp, Mooween, which he attended near his home in Connecticut. Barney Cap Gurdon, who had a wide-ranging interest in science and nature, ran the camp. Land and his friends were all amazed when Gurdon used a chunk of mineral crystal known as Iceland spar to eliminate the glare reflecting off of a shiny tabletop. A Danish physicist, Erasmus Bartholin, had observed this effect as early as the mid-17th century. A normal beam of light has within it rays, oscillations of the electric and magnetic fields, moving in all directions. This random and unorganized action produces glare. The crystal is able to filter out all light rays except those that are traveling in a single straight plane. The result, visually, is the elimination of glare that is present in normal diffused light. In the late 18th century, the English physicist Thomas Young explained the effect by describing how the light rays were polarized at right angles to each other. When Land later consulted physical optics, he discovered that Wood had described the effect with deceptive simplicity. Rays of light exist which possess a one-sidedness and behave differently when differently orientated. For example, it is possible to obtain light that a glass or water surface refuses to reflect at a certain angle of incidence. Such light is said to be polarized. Later that summer, Land took a nighttime automobile drive with a camp counselor. In those days, vehicles were equipped with only very faint headlights. When the car almost crashed into a team of horses hitched to a farmer's cart, Land concluded that brighter headlights would be more useful, but had an inherent drawback. They would create glare for oncoming traffic and perhaps pose an even greater safety hazard. Polarization, Land thought, like that produced by the Iceland spar crystal, might somehow offer a solution. This possibility quickly became a subject for discussion by Land, Gurdon, and the other campers for the rest of that summer, and for summers to come. Land attended high school at Norwich Free Academy, where he continued to demonstrate his superior intellect and some athletic ability as well. He had an impressive high school career, excelling on the debating team and the track team. But what really set him apart was his work in the physics lab, where he began investigating the phenomenon of polarized light. His teacher, Raymond Case, recalled that by Land's senior year, he was already working at a level where I couldn't help him. The inscription under Land's graduation photograph in the 1926 Norwich Free Academy yearbook reads, "Ed is some star in his studies, and we are sure that he will make a name for himself and alma mater in college." Only 17 years old, Land graduated with near-perfect marks and enrolled that fall at Harvard University. His stay at Harvard, however, was to be brief. Immediately upon arrival, Land resumed the experiments with polarized light that he had been conducting at home while in high school. It would not be overstating it to say that Land had become completely preoccupied with the subject. Years later, he would recall the full vividness of my own need at the age of 17 to do something scientifically significant and tangibly demonstrable. At the age in which each week seems like a year, I decided that the great opportunity was polarized light. More specifically, Land was obsessed with finding a solution to the automobile headlight dilemma. Brighter light bulbs could be made, and a car's electrical system could power them, but the glare would dazzle drivers of cars going in the opposite direction. Prisms made of the crystals like those Land had encountered at summer camp could theoretically do the job, but they were impractical because of their bulk. They were also very expensive. There are not enough of those great and precious crystals to cover the headlights of the cars in a single city block, and the headlights of these cars would be more expensive than the entire remainder of the cars, Land lamented. Instead, Land set out, as he later described it, to determine whether or not one could make a material in the form of a synthetic sheet which could polarize light. At the end of a single semester, it had become apparent to him that the pursuit of a practical polarizer was a more pressing problem and worthwhile objective than his education, and so he stunned family and friends by taking a leave of absence to concentrate on his research. As Thomas Edison had done decades earlier, Land moved to New York and immersed himself in a study of the scientific literature on optics in the great reading room of the New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue. Harry Land was not pleased with Edwin's decision to leave Harvard, and the son was still dependent on his father for financial support. Accordingly, they struck a bargain in which Edwin enrolled for the spring term at New York University, and Harry continued to provide his college allowance. Land, however, did not spend much, if any, time at NYU's Washington Square campus. Instead, he put in long days of research at the Midtown Library, immersing himself in optics and light polarization. This consuming absorption would remain at the heart of Land's work over the rest of his career. A lifelong motto was, "If anything is worth doing, it's worth doing to excess." Land had learned early on that total engrossment was the best way for him to work. He strongly believed that this kind of concentrated focus could also produce extraordinary results for others. Late in his career, Land recalled that his whole life had been spent trying to teach people that intense concentration for hour after hour can bring out in people resources they didn't know they had. He once vividly described the intensity of his scientific focus in a speech he gave for an audience of student inventors at MIT's Junior Science Symposium, as he articulated his philosophy of intellectual investigation and how it impacted the other elements of his life. "My own recollection of your age is a curious alternation which I think goes on through life for the scientist. It is alternation between the one mood and attitude of feeling part of the race as a whole, part of the family, part of the neighborhood, the mood of being in love with friends, women, men, people all over the world, the mood of being in love with what is great in music and art. All that on the one hand, and then quite suddenly a separateness that comes during the preoccupation with a particular scientific task. There is a need, a transient need, a violent need for being just yourself, restating, recreating, talking in your own terms about what you have learned from all the cultures, scientific and non-scientific, before you and around you. You want to be almost alone with just a few friends. You want to be undisturbed. You want to be free to think, not for an hour at a time or 3 hours at a time, but for 2 days or 2 weeks, if possible, without interruption. You don't want to drive the family car or go to parties. You wish people would just go away and leave you alone while you get something straight. Then you get it straight, and you embody it, and during that period of embodiment you have a feeling of almost divine guidance. Then it is done, and suddenly you are alone, and you have to go back to your friends and the world around you and to all history, to be refreshed, to feel alive and human once again. It is this interplay between all that is richly human and this special, concentrated, uninterrupted mental effort that seems to me to be the source not only of science, but also of everything that is worthwhile in life. Settled in New York City, Land was soon conducting experiments in search of a solution to what had been the long-standing obstacle to realizing the practical benefits of polarized light. He needed a way to duplicate the effect achieved with the large block of crystal in a material that would be of more practical use. Land has very little respect for the forces of nature, a colleague noted. He wants to rearrange the forces of nature and just goes ahead and does it. The effort continued through 1927 and 1928 in a series of rented rooms in Manhattan. His first laboratory was located in a room he rented just a few blocks north of famed Times Square in Midtown Manhattan, on West 55th Street off Broadway. This was the pre-Depression era New York of Jimmy Bo James Walker, the legendary bon vivant mayor. The Murderers Row lineup of New York Yankees featuring Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig was in the process of winning back-to-back World Series by twice sweeping its National League opponents 4-0. In the spring of 1927, Land moved uptown to a small house on Riverside Drive and 104th Street, with a basement room in which he could work. This location offered the resources of Columbia University in terms of its physics laboratories and the availability of students to help him with his experiments. Early in 1928, Land moved to another rental on 106th Street and Amsterdam Avenue, again with a basement in which he could set up shop. Around this time, Land met a young woman who was interested in his work and who became his primary research assistant. Her name was Helen Maislin, but she was known as Terry. She read with him in the library and then became his laboratory aide in an era when, according to Professor F.W. Campbell of Britain's Royal Society, women were not normally allowed in physics laboratories. Years later, Land admitted that many of his early experiments were conducted at Columbia clandestinely. He and Terry would climb out a hallway window and then along a ledge on the outside of the building. They would climb back into a physics laboratory window and then proceed to remove the hinges from a locked cabinet to get at the necessary equipment. Much later, after he demonstrated the results of some experiments to the professor in charge, Land was finally given a key to the facility. During this period, Land tried several approaches to finding a practical way to harness the magic of polarized light. One of the first, as he later explained, was to make polarizers by reflecting light from metallic plates. For a time, he worked with other kinds of materials. Often, Land would read up on a predecessor's work in the field and then duplicate that experimental work in his own laboratory, trying to learn whatever he could from those unsuccessful attempts to solve the problem. As he reviewed the physics literature for more ideas on how to pursue a polarizer that would have practical applications, Land eventually came upon the work of William Herapath. In 1852, Herapath had discovered that when quinine was added to the urine of a sick dog, tiny needle-shaped crystals formed. In a random distribution, these crystallites appeared black when overlapped and otherwise clear. This property was attributed to polarization. The crystalline material was later designated Herapathite. Unfortunately, neither Herapath nor other scientists who had tried over the next 7 decades had been able to find a way to make a useful material out of Herapathite. The problem appeared to be that the tiny, fragile crystallites flew apart when touched. No one had been able to come up with a method of fixing them in place in the uniform orientation necessary to realize their unique polarizing properties, let alone in a material that could be adapted for various applications. For Land, this was just the challenge he was looking for. Initially, he began to work with larger crystals that he thought might be easier to handle than the ones Herapath had discovered. But when he duplicated Herapath's work, he concluded that his smaller crystallites were far and away the best optically. It was at once apparent that in Herapath's extraordinary product there resided the clue to the development of satisfactory polarizers and to the utilization of polarized light on a large scale in an industrial way. And so he set out to succeed where Herapath and others had failed. It was now the spring of 1928, and Land believed that he was finally on the right track. With his college allowance in some jeopardy, given the fact that he was no longer in school, Land went home to visit his father. He told him what he had been doing, and then took Harry out for a drive at night. According to Land, as they drove along with headlights shining in their eyes, he told his father, "I think I know how to take the glare out of car headlights. Can I borrow $5,000 to get a business going?" Harry was supportive and agreed to give Edwin the money, but he was concerned that his young son might not be able to fend for himself in the business world. Land recalled his father warning him to watch out. Once you develop it, the big companies will take it away from you. It was advice that Land took to heart and filed away for future use. Land decided to continue his work in the kitchen of his parents' summer house on Long Island Sound, near New London, Connecticut. He hired Joseph Friedman, an organic chemist, to assist him. Together they searched for a way of fixing an array of the small crystals on a clear, flexible material in the proper orientation. Finding the right medium proved to be the easy part. Early on they had success employing the kind of lacquer used in spray paint, replacing the colored particles that tinted the paint with the tiny crystallites. At the end of the summer, Land and Friedman moved their operation to a one-room laboratory in a nearby office building Harry owned. There, he and Friedman made a breakthrough discovery on how to orient the...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?